fourth take, let me get to it. 2017 versus 2007, July 15th at the exact same time of day, EUVI at 195 angstroms on stereo ahead, because it's the only piece of equipment that was working from 2007 to 2017, period, end of statement. And in the video I'm critiquing, these are the images, or approximately the same images, that were used. I don't know how much, well, cherry picking they did, but they picked images that showed dramatic changes. Then, well, the images that were shown were done by somebody who calls himself the, you know, the icy farmer or whatever. And also I'd like to point out that he took out a black marker to make it look more dramatic. Thanks to the paint job. I thought Photoshop was bad, but good God. Anyway, I'm just going to say this really quietly, debunked. So next, here we go. At 2 minutes and 39 seconds out of a 1 hour long waste of my time, the Ulysses probe was quoted, and it did 3 orbits from 1990 through 2009 that are being cited in this image. And it's the 3rd image, so we're literally at the end of the images I'm going to critique. So anyway, it shows over an 18-year period of time the intensity level of the, what is that black line for? And then there's a red line, what's that for? Anyway, it says really big letters, 25% reduction. Okay. And it says 50% reduction in solar wind pressure. Pressure? Okay. In 2015. The equipment was shut off in 2009, so how does that know anything about 2015? And why is there a question mark pointing to 2010 and the graph? And why does the graph go from 0 to 80? Well, the graph on the left goes from 0 to 140. Let's enhance. Oh, okay, now it's much clearer. Smoothed sunspot number. So that indicates that 2001 was a high sunspot activity level. Okay. It also had a dramatic change from 140. Wait a minute, the red line, what does that refer to? Oh, well, it's supposed to be solar wind pressure. That's what it's graphing, right? That's why you pointed an arrow at it? No, it's the current sheet tilt degree. That means the angle at which this north-south orbiting object was orbiting the sun. Yeah, when it was going around the sun on the first orbit, it measured the magnetic field, or excuse me, not the magnetic field, it measured the effect the magnetic field had on the solar wind. Now, how do I know that? Well, that was during solar minimum. During solar minimum, the sun's solar wind looks like it's blasting out of the north and south poles, basically. It's polarized, and there are 2 solar winds, and they're not mixed together. During the solar maximum, 2001 apparently, it had a lot of chaos in it. You can see that graph there. Hey, they provided graph information that's useful. It had lots and lots of solar activity instead of being pretty much a strip. And then it went back to a reduced level. What? What's that? Oh, anyway, during that period of time, it was back down to being solar minimum again, like it is now, where the solar wind is stable and rationalized because the magnetic field of the sun is now stable. It dominates the solar wind and makes it behave a certain way. The 2 different solar winds are caused by 2 different layers of the sun emitting material. During solar minimums like now, it's more stable, less chaotic, and it does not reduce its intensity level. The actual irradiance, the energy that hits the Earth, that comes from the sun, changes by 0.1% between solar minimum and solar maximum. It is not a dramatic change. Number 1. Number 2, this is not a graph of solar wind pressure. It's a graph of the solar intensity level tested for pressure based on angle. That's the angle the craft was at. Next, it stopped working in 2009, so why does it have a graph that continues after that point? Next, if that isn't the degree angle of its position around the sun compared to the equator, then I'd like someone to explain to me why it would have a zeroing out during the solar maximum and then go back up. You know, like it's orbiting the sun every 6 years. Let's count them. Let's assume that if it's a solar minimum, minimum angle and intensity, let's see, that would be 6 years. So let's get that done here. So from 1999 through 2001, it's not going to work. What about, I'm not going to do it anymore. Look, if anybody's curious, this thing was on a 6-year orbit around the sun. That's plenty of time for it to get all sorts of information. They were trying to figure out where the solar wind came out more intensely, and they happened to bookend it just enough to where they could do this during a period of time. We had a solar maximum. I guess it was 2001. I don't know. That's where the sunspot numbers come up. But why is somebody putting a pointer at the solar wind pressure when it's really pointing at just the degree angle it was positioned at relative to the equator of the sun? And I do like the fact that they kind of show part of the orbit in the last frame with a question mark on it. And they're like, what's with this gap? Well, that's when it stopped working. It stopped working partway through an orbit. They had to slingshot this around Jupiter to get the damn thing to work. Now, I'd like to point out that this says it's third document of 3 pages total, and this was a presentation someone else did. I didn't include the second picture, but you can go look at the video. I'll include links below. They point right to the beginning of it. The assertions made during that video are not just erroneous, they're wrong. Next, if you want to look up the solar wind pressure as a graph, good luck finding it. You have to grab the data and build your own graph. And it shows all sorts of things. And there's even an assertion in 2008 where a shocking, scary statement was made by NASA that it says this is the lowest intensity we've measured. Yeah, during that orbit, it was the lowest intensity measured by that piece of equipment, because that was the only piece of equipment that was measuring at the time for the solar wind. Look, if you want to look this stuff up, go to NASA. Don't go to some YouTuber, including me. So let's review. The previous one I've already done one on. This is apparently image number 2. I'm just using the raw images because, you know, I'm going to actually use the images without whipping out paint and modifying it, because that would be dishonest. End of critique for that. And the third image, someone deliberately mislabeled, and yes, someone, I'm not saying who, deliberately mislabeled the angle at which this object was orbiting on a 6-year orbit as being the solar wind pressure, when it's not. And yes, during 2001, during a solar maximum where there's no real defined north or south pole to the sun, you're going to have chaotic pressure levels, I suppose, right? So maybe it is pressure level. Look, if anybody's curious, no, the solar wind pressure doesn't change that much during, between, solar maximum versus solar minimum. It changes by 0.1%. Any graph that doesn't show that is lying. Thanks for watching. Have a good day. Good luck with that, and don't take any wooden realities.